over so many years, so many discussions and so many debates about what is an Afrikaner. And I think it's also the right way to go, especially in these days that we live in. Traditionally, an Afrikaner is described as a person of European descent, who is a native speaker of Afrikaans and is descended from Dutch, who first arrived in 1952, and later also French and German immigrants to South Africa. And that definition you can, of course, expand to culture and values and faith. So any person or group who wants to identify him or herself with those aspects can also be regarded as an Afrikaner, if they want to. But those characteristics like culture and values and faith can be very different among the Afrikaans-speaking community and do not bind those people to each other unconditionally. In the South Africa context, you can't really get away from the ethnic or race when it comes to the question, are you an Afrikaner or not? I personally do not know one single person who is not white in South Africa and who speaks Afrikaans that call himself or herself an Afrikaner. The best way, I think, is to hear what other fellow citizens say. What do they think is an Afrikaner? People who are not white. How do they identify me as an Afrikaner? I have been involved over many years in organizations where I was sometimes the only white Afrikaans-speaking person in a meeting. And they referred to me as an Afrikaner representative. And when I asked them why, they said, you're from South Africa, you're white, and you speak Afrikaans. So I don't have stats about this, but this is how the majority, I think, of my fellow South Africans see me. And that is fine. I'm a South African, also called an Afrikaner. And I'm part of this beautiful, diverse country of ours with all the other wonderful South Africans.
I think the whole notion of Afrikaner identity is contested or contestable. I grew up speaking Afrikaans, but I could never identify myself as an Afrikaner because I realized that identity had been hijacked by white people, basically, who attach all kind of other connotations to the identity beyond just the language. So they attach elements of culture and often also politics. So I have issues with the identity because it's not inclusive. It doesn't take into consideration the many people who grew up speaking Afrikaans and who still speaks Afrikaans, and who in fact love Afrikaans, even though the variation of Afrikaans that they speak might be different to what others perceive to be the true Afrikaans. So I think it is definitely a contested identity.
Afrikaner identiteit is 'n identiteit wat geformuleer is veral vanaf die vroeë 20ste eeu deur Afrikaner nasionalisme. En ons sien die gebruik van spesifieke sosiale kategorieë van verskillendheid om hierdie identiteit te formuleer, soos met alle identiteite, en veral klem op ras, geslag, seksualiteit, klas en ook etnisiteit. So ons sien 'n sekere soort etniese samesnoering van spesifieke idees oor witheid, spesifieke idees oor wat beteken dit om 'n Afrikaner man en of 'n Afrikaner vrou te wees, spesifieke idees oor klas wat ek uitdruk met die konsep ordentlikheid in my boek Sitting Pretty, ensovoorts. Dit is ook 'n baie heteronormatiewe identiteit. Maar terselfdertyd sien ons ook ewige mededinging in daardie tyd. So die hoofstroom weergawe wat op die ou ende vir ons apartheid gee in 1948, het arriveer nie daar sonder mededinging nie. Daar is verskillende ander uitdrukkings ook van Afrikaner identiteit in die aanloop tot 1948. En ook deur verskillende ideologieë wat aangehang word. Liberalisme, sosialisme, kommunisme, feminisme, ensovoorts. So die dissidente stroming op die ou ende word oortrys dan. Dis deur 'n spesifieke meer reaksionêre stroming wat dan in 48 apartheid tot stand bring. Daai dissidente stroming egter is 'n stroming wat dan van die begin af onder apartheid ook met andersdenkendheid bevorder en wat op die ou ende wat my betref bygedra het tot ons transisie tot demokrasie. Definitief nie die hoofbydra tot daai transisie nie, maar sekerlik 'n bydra is gemaak deur die dissidente Afrikaner manier van dink oor Suid-Afrika. En dit is daai dissidente Afrikaner identiteit waarmee ek myself assosieer.
I am absolutely tired by the fact that the only individuals representing us Afrikaans speakers are individuals like Steve Hofmeyr, who has been vociferously proud of the fact that he follows Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan and Matt Walsh and Jordan Peterson, all of the, male white conspiracy theorists of the incel-apocalypse, the incel apocalypse. See what I did there? And these Afrikaners as a whole, not just Steve Hofmeyr, when someone disagrees with him, you are immediately labeled a socialist, a lefty, a libtard, a snowflake, whatever pejorative they find in their bigoted arsenals, which they very seldomly understand the gravitas or the political definitions of. You are labeled and silenced and essentially bullied by these very oppressed individuals. And throughout this entire ordeal, I keep on thinking to myself, if you have to convince other people how oppressed you are, you're probably not that oppressed, are you? But I should highlight that to break through from this curse of oppression, one needs to address the religious and historical roots of this ordeal. And as a biblical and religion scholar who has studied decoloniality, who has studied the religious and church impacts on apartheid as well as religion in the Afrikaans community and the Afrikaner identity as a whole, one should recognize that this narrative of oppression is deeply rooted in the Christo-fascist and nationalist theology that has been upheld by Christian Afrikaners for centuries. They have believed for centuries that they are God's chosen nation, that they are like the biblical tribe of Israel who suffers from the oppression and the murderous rage of the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. All of these individuals are essentially metaphors through which this Afrikaner envisions this fantasial ideal of pseudo-victimhood. As such, they have been for generations indoctrinated with this pseudo-oppression theology of we as white people are the chosen nation of the biblical God. Jesus was white, he spoke Afrikaans, the Bible was only written in Afrikaans to the Afrikaners, and of course that was evident through the greatest victory in Afrikaans history, the Battle of Blood River, where God gave the chosen Afrikaner nation victory over the evil black people they came to oppress. So this confirmation bias has been preserved in Afrikaner culture and its institutions, and has been promoted as de facto cultural heritage since the dawn of Afrikaner self-existence or self-beskikking. I can't remember what the English translation for that is at the moment, but the entire concept that gave birth to apartheid is something that is rooted in the Afrikaner Calvinist theological identity. As such, to essentially move oneself out of this Afrikaner doctrine is to both disassociate yourself from the Christo-fascist roots of Afrikaans and Afrikanerism. It should also be noted that I don't think the individuals who propagate these myths truly believe in them. I mean, I would 100% be willing to bet that the very individuals who are propagating these myths, such as Afriforum and Solidariteit, Steve Hofmeyr et al., essentially are just propagating it because it's profitable. The same individuals whom they have been having as an audience for generations are their sole funders. They are making bank from these poor sods who have been indoctrinated with these myths, taking advantage like a prosperity gospel sort of charismatic preacher from their oppression and their emotional struggles, taking their money from them towards their own selfish endeavors. But what they didn't expect is when they went and nagged the United States to come and aid them in their oppression, and suddenly they've got an orange tyrant in the Oval Office providing them, an exodus from their perceived oppression. They didn't expect it to backfire. They expected him to come to South Africa and, give Uncle Cyril a pizza on the butt or a slap on the wrist for his very, very racist laws, which I still have to find. But essentially, they didn't expect it would backfire in such a drastic way that they would essentially be exported, I believe, as cheap labor to the United States because of the fact that old Donald Trump is purely in it for America and wants to reduce his state expenditure. And so he's essentially treating, or will be treating prospectively, the average Afrikaner as cheap labor, similar to what they've done to Africans in South Africa.